All right, Inspire Leaders and Teach Better family. I'm so happy that you're with us this week. Thank you so much. I know during the season, especially during the holidays, it is crazy, both on the campus and in our personal lives. So I appreciate your time today. But I am so excited because I have someone that I connected with, I think like 3 years ago. I saw him keynote speak. He was phenomenal. He was funny, engaging. I learned a ton. But not only that, he did work in my own district as an administrator. And I gained so much knowledge from this man. And I'm so excited and happy and honored to have Kevin Curtis with me this evening.
Awesome, man. Hey, Joshua, thank you, man, for having me on the show. Excited to share some experiences and help other educators.
For sure. I know that's going to happen. So before we dive into a bunch of topics and your brand new book, The Connection-Driven Classroom, I want to just touch on your experience. I know you have a vast amount and you've been doing a lot of different things, both at the campus level, but then also like on a grand scheme. So will you just share a little bit about your educational and leadership journey?
Absolutely. And I'll try to make this succinct as possible. I tell people, so this is my 27th year, and I do have experience at the elementary, the middle school, the high school, principal, assistant principal, classroom teacher, instructional coach, and a high school football coach for 10 years. So I tell people all the time, I'm rooted in discipline. So when you look at my DNA, D stands for discipline. When you look at my RNA, R stands for relationship. So to get to know about Kevin Curtis, it's all about DNA and RNA. It's all about discipline and relationships. And I realized that coming through coaching, teaching, and leading on campuses was like my DNA. And a little fun part of that joke, I taught high school science. So I taught integrated physics, biology, chemistry, speech, health, PE, and 1 year of sixth grade math that I tell them I don't like to talk about because when Texas says you can teach one side out of your field, Joshua, I'm like, maybe it shouldn't be math. Because for me, when they said, could you teach sixth grade math? I said I could solve sixth grade math. But it was very humbling back then on a chalkboard to get in front of there. And the kids were like, Coach Curtis, I think you got that wrong. And I'm like, hey, you want to help me out? And so it just taught me early in my career, don't bite off more you can chew. But so that was it. My push to this work. I ended up at Ed White Middle School in San Antonio, Texas, where we led the district with 1,149 types of suspension on a middle school campus with about 1,000 kids, 80% of students minority, 93 SES, 60% turnover in core teacher areas, the lowest scores, the most fights, that campus, right? In fact, when I got the job, Joshua, they were like, you're an Ed White. They'd be like, the Ed White? And when you put a "the" in front of it, the reputation. But when I first came into this campus, I just knew I was, and I will share this experience, particularly for our leaders. I had went from assistant principal back to an assistant principal. And I always enlighten people with that because that was very eye-opening. And I can share more about that as we go through the conversations. But moving back to an AP, all of a sudden I'm back in discipline and behavior. We're leading the district. The whole philosophy I was told was, hey, I know you've been a principal. You run the back of the school. My principal run the front of the school. And the philosophy that I was given was get rid of the kids that don't want to be here so the rest of the kids can learn. In modern days, I equate that to the weeds. We pull weeds, and so the rest of the flower can grow. So I pulled enough that we had led the district. We were the number one exclusionary campus out of all Northeast Independent School District, and I believe back then that was about 77,000 students. And when central office came down and said, this is not good. You're number one exclusionary. I got very defensive because I was like, this is what you told me to do. I literally put a letter of resignation in, and my boss was like, hey, before you resign and make something a quick decision, let's talk about this. And I give the credit to a gentleman named Robert Rico. Robert Rico is an adjunct professor. He's the director of restorative practices or restorative justice at UTSA, but he was a police officer at this point who was using restorative in the community in Bernie, just west of San Antonio. And he pitched us the idea of being the first restorative campus. And at this point, it was hard because I said, restore what? Restore a car, restore furniture, restore paintings. I knew something of the concept of old to new, but I didn't quite understand what it was for us to be a restorative campus. And so he mentioned Oakland, restorative justice of youth, our joy. And so he pitched us the model. We learned a lot about it. But before you know it, we're piloting. We partnered with UT at Austin. They had the Institute of Restorative Justice and Restorative Dialogue. Dr. Marilyn Armour codified the process. We did evaluations with our parents, students, teachers, everything. And we did a 3-year evaluation. And by 3 years, we had dropped suspensions after year 1 to year 2, 89%, 38% reduction in office referrals. I saw kids holding themselves accountable. It was really transformative. But here's what I tell people. If you would have met me prior to that year of implementation, and I say this and I'm so embarrassed at it, but I used to tell kids to kick rocks. And I'm not kidding, I would make that statement. You're suspended. Your parent can't pick you up. I know you don't have enough gas money, but you know what? We're going to kick rock. Like, I need you to walk home. And they'd be like, Mr. Curtis. And I'm like, no, in fact, let me show you. I'll walk you to the curb. This is off campus. If you come back on, this is on campus. That's a CTW. That's a criminal trespass warning. And I can't believe that that's how I talk to kids. But 3 years later, I was telling kids, Joshua, hey, I love you. And today you made a poor choice with a poor voice. But you know what? That does not define you. But I'm still sending you home. And you know what? I'm going to drive you home. I'm going to get you a haircut. We'll stop at Whataburger. Whatever. Like, it was all about love and care and unconditional commitment for these kids. And I remember when Jim Walsh reached out by email. Of course, I was fanboy, right? Jim Walsh, the law dog. You know, if you don't know him in Texas, as a special ed attorney, he's very popular. But when he sent this message, he wanted to come visit us. And I remember when he came to visit us, along with 24 other campuses or districts during that time, along with TEA, he just asked me, he said, how did you flip? And I said, I didn't flip. I called new plays. The football coach in me and said, I felt like what I was doing, Josh, was running the same play in education and gaining no yards. And I think what I realized is this restorative journey allowed me to go, wait a minute, there's another play I could run. I just didn't have this in my playbook, in my arsenal. So we piloted it. I looped up with my kids. So I went from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade. I was a dad figure of discipline. I learned so much about my kids. My kids learned about me. And then at the end of 3 years, the 3-year evaluation was written. My kids were going to high school. And then TEA, based on the experiences, the data, and the support of the project that UT had written, said, we want to do training across the state of Texas. So TEA lured me. They didn't offer me a job. They said, we give you an opportunity to travel through all 20 service centers, do the Texas tour. So in 2015, I exited from inside of education to the outside, walked away with no salaries, no benefits, no nothing. I was married to an elementary principal, and she said, you're crazy for doing this. And I said, I'm a cog in a wheel of a system that's broke. And if I just leave, they're just going to replace me with another cog. I want to make an impact in education, and I believe that this is my best opportunity to do it. So I started consulting, did the Texas tour, trained 1,000 administrators, co-published the book, Restorative Discipline Practices, with Dr. Lang and others in Texas about trying to get our restorative journey off the ground. And then I just started consulting 1 school, 2 schools, 3 schools. And before you know it, the biggest thing I think that set me on the mark was in Dallas ISD, which would be my largest customer in Texas. We went from Bowd Story Middle School, went from 219 suspensions down to 17, made the front page of the Dallas Morning News. And then I call it like good cooking. A lot of schools in the DFW area, much like Frisco and others and Plano, came over to say what's cooking. And before you know it, I ended up in 14 school districts at various times in the DFW area, holding conferences, speaking, and just kind of became the OG of RD in the state of Texas. And then that just kind of set me on the path to training, coaching, and supporting and restorative practices and accountability and connections.
That's awesome, man. And kudos to you. You've made a huge impact both in Texas, but also in my own journey. I know I told already that I saw you speak. I've actually heard you speak multiple times. And like I said, I've gotten training from you. And I was in a very similar situation where we were suspending left and right and thousands of minutes were being lost in the classroom. I'm curious, though. I know you're probably talking about this in the book, and we're going to definitely dive into that. But, one of the things that I was always kind of pushing up against was just these different mindsets of, this is how we've done it. This is how it should be done. And I don't want to change within the classroom, and having my expectations change also in regards to what the punishment should look like for a specific action. So I know for you, you talked about calling different plays as a coach. I think that's probably easier to do as an individual, but now, being the campus leader, I'm just curious how you were able to make that flip as far as a culture change to kind of change the mindsets of those that, are working with our kids.
Absolutely. No, it's a really, really strong point. It's when you cut, the one thing I've learned about this work is when you use discipline, it cuts against the grain of a lot of things and our own beliefs and our own biases. And I tell, when I work with adults, I try to be very upfront with them, and I tell them, don't take this wrong, but kids are so much easier to work with than adults, and they all laugh. They agree with it, right? But we have our own biases, our own beliefs, our own ideas, our own walls, right? And so I'm so glad you asked this question, because I'm going to kind of wrap around this question in a variety of different ways. But the first thing I would say is vocabulary, because to me, if you understand my journey, and I do allude this in the book a little bit, but restorative discipline is what we chose to call our platform at White. Then the state called it restorative discipline, and then eventually it went to restorative discipline practices. But a lot of the trainings that I was going to was restorative justice, right? And so this is only Kevin Curtis's interpretation, so I don't want to offend anyone in this work. But what I try to tell people is, in my world, RJ is a little bit more left. RD was a little bit more right, and RP was in the middle. So my first business name, believe it or not, Joshua, was RD360. I was so hooked on restorative discipline with the circle, like that was going to be it. But I quickly realized that once we started taking it across the state of Texas, even though I had drank the Kool-Aid, as they said. I was now preaching and teaching at service centers, and particularly where you went in our state of Texas, right? You could run into a wall, a blue wall or a red wall or anything in between. And so what I started noticing was the pushback came from the wording. And here's what I quickly identified with. I believe, this is my only opinion, even when the state changed it to RDP, so they went to a hybrid, restorative discipline practices. Here's what I told Dr. Lang and anyone else that would listen to me through TEA and others. The minute you put the word discipline in it, we're screwed. And this is why I abandoned restorative discipline, or RD, as my identity, because when you take discipline into the concept and you bring that vocabulary word in, you can put any word front of it, back of it, doesn't matter. As soon as an educator hears the word discipline, we're going to go back to punishment, pain, and blood if we can legally get it. And people freak out today that people still paddle in the state of Texas, right? But either way, the minute we have the word discipline in it, we're never going to go back to change the connotation of the word discipline to teach, to train, to disciple, to go back to its Latin roots. So therefore, what I did is instead of fighting it, I just went along with it and got off the word discipline and went into the word restorative practices. So what I would have to remind themselves is just as much as in my career, you would tell them what restorative practices was, you have to tell them what it wasn't. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to be a fix for all kids, because I think that's what some people try either in the work to portray it, or people try to, with cynicism, try to say, oh, you just think you have a silver bullet. No, I don't have all the answers. And in fact, I would be very honest. And I think why my work resonated particularly more in Texas and in other places was people said, this man's being honest. At least he's not coming in and like a snake oil salesman and trying to sell us something. He's telling us what it is, what it's not, what it's going to do, maybe what it's not going to do. But I talked to them and I said, but believe it or not, the first hurdle that we have to get over is the adult minds. And at White, we kicked the door down and told them what they do. Well, as I start to work with campuses, I realized we're going to need buy-in. We're going to need support. We're going to need to make this part of the culture and climate of the campus. And so I've gone through that whole agenda where we told people what to do, and now I've seen it work, and then I've seen it be unsuccessful. So I believe when I work with schools, one, I want to know how many initiatives are already on your plate. What are you currently trying to tackle? And I've had so much respect for a school district to say, Kevin, I don't think the right time to bring you in this work because we have too many other things, that it will get watered down. And I'm like, I appreciate that. So I think when we work with adults, the hardest part is getting the vocabulary the right way and then unpacking it in a way that the teachers feel like it's part of the work that they do and embed it. And so I think in the work that you'll start to see in the book and stuff, I shift from, I used to be very guilty of saying the plate is relationships and you put everything else on it. And now I kind of throw up in my mouth when I say that, because I'm being honest, like that's just a smoke screen. Anything that you give educators to do, there's going to be one more thing. And so instead of fighting the vision of that, it's not, I'm just very direct and explain to them, like, this is going to be something, but it's not going to be the magic bullet, silver bullet, change everything. But it does have a lot of strengths and characteristics, but that's only going to come with buy-in and with cooperation and conversations and communication. So there's so many layers to it. I hope that kind of answered some of that question.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because I was coaching a administrator this morning who's, doing this work. She's trying very hard, and it's like 3 years into the plan, right? And the mindset, everyone understands the data, they understand it's important work. However, when they're in the midst of maybe a student behavior, then sometimes they take it personally, or they start to deviate from what was trained and maybe go back to some of the traditional practices that they kind of default to. And then it starts to become the question of, what are we going to do about the discipline problem? So when you hear that, how would you answer specifically like the discipline problem? I know you were talking about discipline as a vocabulary word. So would you change the vocabulary in that instance?
It's a really good question. I mean, and you just look at right now. I mean, my company is called Differentiated Discipline, but here's what's
Yeah.
interesting. When I chose the word discipline, I did it with a clear target, with clarity of knowing that I wanted people to, when they saw my brand, and I'm not trying to muddy the waters, but like I
Sure.
was NEDRP, so National Educators for Restorative Practices for 8 years. So NEDRP, the hard part was people would be like, so what does NEDRP stand for?
Hmm.
If you didn't spell it out. And then they also would be like, so it's just restorative practices. And so when I rebranded in January, it was to add clarity to the name because I needed people to understand that 100% of my customer base come through the door of discipline and behavior. So therefore, it's not like people are reaching out to me from schools for other reasons. So if they're coming
Yep.
through the discipline and behavior door, then I wanted discipline in the name. And then second of all, I chose the word, in being a very interesting, I chose the color purple because what I kept saying, Josh, was I don't want to be blue, I don't want to be red. And if you take blue and red and put them together, you get purple. So there was a lot of intentionality to say, I don't want to be, because I've had some districts say, you have restorative in the name, we won't do business because my superintendent is anti-restorative. So I just realized, in my opinion, restorative had a shelf life. And so get back to your question. When I go back to the word discipline, what I explain to them is that when you look at that situation, right, the best way to understand for me, and I talked about this at that conference that day at TEPSA, is discipline to me is like water. So the best way for me to help people dissect and understand discipline better is just like this bottle of water. So discipline, what I tell the teachers is going to flow throughout your entire building. Yes, we don't want to take it personal. Yes, we want to make sure that we're giving grace where we can, but we're all human. So I don't expect teachers to be perfect, and I don't expect them to execute them all the best ways possible either. But if we could understand this, that discipline flows through our entire water system, and the discipline that flows out of our classrooms, there are in every single building some classrooms that let more water out than others. I mean, it's just the natural of the beast. Ours was room 212. So a lot of water came out of room 212 to the point, Joshua, where like when we would get a call, we would rock, paper, scissors to see who's going to go cover the next water issue, right? But when the water comes out, the first thing I say is the temperature of the water. The first thing is you have hot water coming out of the classroom. And if you have hot water coming out of the classroom, you realize teachers and students, if you're both hot water, you can't see your reflection in hot water. So the first thing I get them to recognize is if you're hot and the kid's hot, neither one of us can reflect at that point. So we're not in a place that we should try to deal with discipline issues, conversations, dealing with conflict, right? We need to actually separate and cool the water down. So as the water flows out through our building, the first thing we recognize, we have hot water coming into our counselors, administrative office, support places, right? When that water gets there, we're all indoctrinated to knowing, whether you thought of it this way or not, the first thing you do is you cool water. You cool water, you let them sit there, you give them a clipboard, you give them opportunities, whatever. But the first thing we know is we cool the water. And then after we cool the water, we move the water. So we may move the water to ISS, we may sit at home, we may change its schedule, whatever. But at the end of the day, we cool water and we move water. Now hold on to those 2 points. The big interesting part is when I work with teachers in discipline is when the water has to eventually come back. Now, here in the state of Texas, we can't exclude them beyond 72 hours or 3 days consecutively. So therefore, eventually when that water returns, what happens is the teacher's like, hey, Joshua, this is the same water that I just sent you. And that's the part where the learning goes off, because teachers think that administrators change water. And as far as I know, there's only one human being that's ever changed water to wine, and it's none of us. And so that is where I help teachers get on the same page. I literally have a shirt that says, I just move water. I just cool water. Because when teachers could understand what our roles and responsibilities are, then we can start to calibrate. But what teachers think for a lot of times, and again, I'm paraphrasing and stereotyping, but a lot of teachers think that when you send the kid or the kid comes out, that we're going to change them. And that's what I explain to them. My limitation is to cool water and to move water. I move water around and then it goes back. It's like the water cycle. And then what happens is the teacher's like, this is the same day water I sent you. And therefore, I'm still pissed at this kid because of the way this kid talked to me or what happened. And so I don't want this water. Well, then how many times as an administrator or a counselor, you have this water just hanging out on your shoulder? The water wants to spend time with you. The water wants to hang out with you. Why? There's a reason why, because you were able to cool it and move it and connect with it. And what I try to tell the teachers is if you really want the water to not go to me, first of all, here's what I would tell you. Teachers go, if you're just going to cool water and move water, why am I sending you the water? That's a really good point, because I'm actually trying to get you to send me less water. The second part of that is if you truly want to knots in your water, then you got to get to know your water, which kind of goes back to the tools in the book. The more you connect with the water, the more you get to know your water. But see, your water's not dumb. Some of your water goes, he or she pushes the buttons and pushes my buttons to make me go hot so that I will exit the classroom. So there's a whole dynamic of that. But I do believe that when I use the disciplined water cycle, it at least allows us to calibrate and get on an even playing field and understanding the water cycle. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love that analogy so much. Yeah, I want to touch on your book because obviously it's the connection-driven classroom. We just talked on connection there. You were referencing that, and I know for me as an administrator, that was one of the things I just assumed that teachers had this tool belt of ways to connect with their kids, and then what I suddenly realized was that wasn't the case, and I actually needed to like provide some things. Obviously, your book probably has a slew of strategies, so could you just touch on how important that connection piece is and maybe some ways that our leaders can kind of translate that to our teachers?
Sure. Well, so the first aha that you just recognized, I didn't even recognize it when I was still a campus leader. It wasn't until I was consulting and actually up in Arlington. And I just remember at the end of a great day of training, the principal came up and said, "Hey, today was great, motivated, blah, blah, blah. But here's where he got me is he said, you know what, for 20 years, I've been leading this campus and I told the importance is what he said. I've told the importance of why it is to connect with kids, right? He goes, but you know what they're leaving with today is the how to. Now, I heard it and I brushed over it. I jumped on my little love flight back to San Antonio. And as I was on that flight, I was like, is that what I do? And then I came back and asked my team, I said, all right, because at that point we had two colors. Green was proactive, red was responsive, right? And I said, how much of our trainings are green? And they're like 90-10. And I said, when did we become a professional development company that teaches proactive tools? And I said, but so I tell people, I didn't even intentionally try to hit that target. But once that light was come on, then even on my podcast, which it had 77 episodes through the pandemic, the Relationship Centered Learning podcast, here's what I ask these questions to superintendents and to principals. Who teaches your teachers how to build relationships? And all of them are like, nobody. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. And as you just pointed out, we expect them and we think that they have this toolkit that automatically comes as an educator. But we recognize, in my opinion, that maybe 10, if you're lucky, 15% of your staff naturally are gifted with what I call it. So if 10 or 15% of your staff are gifted with it, and 10% of your staff is probably not going to do anything anyways. So that leaves you about 70 to 75% of your staff. And when you look at will and skill, they have the willingness, but there's no capacity because nobody's teaching it. So when I look at this, what I realize is this book and the work that I've been doing is to fill in that gap. If nobody's teaching teachers how to build relationships and connections, then we're just expecting them to know how to do it. And that just makes me scratch my head because if we expect them to know how to do it, then through osmosis, through just reading, I don't know where that really is going to come. So what the book came for me was, it's been birthed for about 6 years. It was a project that got crashed and burned and up. But the book really, when it finally came out, was for me was like, not only do I have tools, but I have 4 tools that take less than 2 minutes. That was the biggest aha. In the world of restorative, everything is done in circles and in large groups or smaller groups in conflict and confrontations or mediations in circles, but everything else is about circle. I was, in my opinion, when I was particularly working with Fort Worth ISD after Dallas ISD, we clicked onto this, like, circle is too heavy for teachers. And when I say this, even community building, it takes up too much time, too much space. So I realized, like, I call circle the elephant of restorative practices. That's not a negative thing. It just means it's the biggest, takes up the most time, the most space, and it puts us in the most awkward conversations at times if you don't know how to facilitate it. So I call it like crawl, walk, run. So teachers aren't ready to run with circle unless you're in that 10 to 15%. So when I built these tools, what I recognized is if we need simple tools that teachers that are practical can go back in the classroom and embed the very next day. So hence our meet and greet, which is be seen at the door, smile, eye contact, engage, and use your name, 60-second relay breaks, 2-minute connections, positive spark interactions, and our social contract, which is our treatment agreement. But the best part about this is I also figured out that when you ask a teacher, so why do you build a relationship? What's the purpose of this activity? 2 truths and a lie, brown bag, doesn't matter. When you ask them, what's the purpose? I will tell you 90% of educators, if you're honest with yourself, will say, for me to get to know my students better. And I'm like, great. But here's what I figured out, that there's actually 3 areas to community building, and they are only addressing 1/3. Student to teacher, and teacher to student. So not only am I giving you 3 outcomes specifically, now you've got 3 targeted areas: student to student connection, student to teacher, teacher to student, and you have 4 tools that take less than 2 minutes. And to me, this is what's mind boggling. In the state of Texas, for example, under T-Test domain 3.2, teachers have to put stuff in for self-evaluation. Like, what are you going to do for climate, culture, and relationship building in the classroom? But let's just say, leaders, pull out your evaluations. Even in the state of Ohio, it's a different domain, but it doesn't matter where you go. Teachers are putting fluff in there because there is no practical strategies that you can put down that are concrete ways to be able to do this. So what's frustrating to me is I can give you practical strategies to put in there. Administrators can go in there and evaluate them in there. And you know that there's 3 targeted outcomes: student to student, student to teacher, teacher to student, which is what I call cross-connecting. Now you've got a goal. Now you've got something that's in front of you that you can use time. It can be systemic. It can be sustainable. And once you embed this into your classroom routines, then it just becomes part of your DNA. So it isn't seen as one more thing. In the fact that it can be done in less than 2 minutes, I think only plays into the fact that teachers say that we don't have time.
No, that's a huge hurdle. I mean, like, number one thing of, like, if you are teaching anything, time is always what is brought up immediately. So if you can scale that down for them to say, do you have 2 minutes in your class? Of course you do. So I think that's such a beautiful thing. I want you to talk more about the book real quick, Kevin, as we're going to transition into some of the projects that you've got going on. And I know you serve in so many ways with school districts and with educators. So the connection-driven classroom, if someone's looking for something to, help them specifically with student behavior, why would they pick up this resource?
Absolutely. Well, I think it just piggybacks off exactly what we just talked about. Nobody's teaching teachers how to do this. And then I love this quote, right? We have a connection problem disguised as a discipline problem. So I'm going to say this again. We have a connection problem disguised as a discipline problem. Now, when I ask that question, I get a lot of different answers, but here's what we typically land on. The teacher that has the strongest connections in your building typically has the least amount of discipline issues and typically the highest scores. I see you shaking your head, and I've yet to find a school leader that doesn't agree with that. So then my question becomes is that when I ask a campus leader right now, if I walked up to one of your leaders and said, how are your teachers at building relationships? Here's what's frustrating. They're like, we're good. And I'm like, okay. Is that visceral? Is that just your gut feeling? How do you know that you're good? And if you're so good at relationships, then my question is, then you must have very little discipline issues. They're like, no, we have a lot of discipline issues. Well, then I'm confused because those are congruent. Right. So you're talking about we're great at building relationships, but yet we have a lot of classroom and discipline behavior issues. And I'm so confused because if you truly had great relationships and connections in the classrooms, then you wouldn't have as many discipline issues. So when you look at my approach to come into districts, the first thing I tell them is if we don't do the connection driven classroom, how are you going to slow the amount of water that comes out of the classrooms that comes into the administrators' offices? Because when administrators hire me to do restorative toolkit or another training I do called disrupting discipline, which is I teach you differentiated discipline. That's a whole other topic. But in order for me to transform a school district, it's got to be a 1-2 approach. I can't just teach administrators tools how to deal with conflict and confrontation in a different way. I've got to slow the amount of water down. So by slowing the amount of water down, why would I want you to buy this book? Because right now, if you're a campus leader and you have teachers that are hemorrhaging with the amount of water that's coming out of their classrooms, I would just tell you one thing that most people do, and if I have a graphic that if you look at an equation, Joshua, everybody looks at after the equal sign. And when they call me, I'm like, okay, we're disproportionate, or we got a teacher's classroom on fire, right? And I'm like, great, well, we're going to go back to the other side of the equation and we're going to do proactive relationship building. They're like, no, you missed the whole question. I'm like, no, you actually missed the formula because you're so busy putting out fires that you think that all I could do is come put out fires and that's going to help you. I want to prevent fires. And what I've recognized in our data supports that teachers average a 50% decrease in what I call tier 1 behaviors, those low-hanging fruits, right? Teachers decrease about a half that. So if teachers can cut the discipline in half, that means less amount of water is coming to your office. And all they're doing is investing in 2-minute connections or 60-second light breaks and those tools in there. It sounds mind-boggling, but it's so simple. And what this book does is not only does it give you the tools, but it lays down the foundation. The entire beginning of the book replicates my trainings. So it tills the mind for the first part of the book. It gets to to know me as an author, as a person, because I'm all about connections before content. So you're going to get to know me, my background, my story, how I grew up in drugs and alcohol, how I'm a statistic, I should have been a statistic, and why I'm here. So there's so many layers that I think what people recognize is this book is not just a toolkit. It is literally a resource. And to just add one more layer to this, it's not just the campus principals right now. I want to make a call right now, a call to action. If teachers are coming out of teacher future educators or teacher pipelines or colleges or university, this book would be a perfect addition to your curriculum, because if teachers are getting ready to come into our field, why not prepare them with a toolkit? And if there's no other book or resource out there that fills in this gap other than this book, why are we not promoting this and putting this in teacher preparations, college preparations? Even right now, I've gotten hired where future teacher educators in high schools are having me come in and train the students in the toolkit as if I was training the teachers, because they've recognized that this resource is unfathomable, the benefit that what these students are going to be able to use as they move into future educators.
So powerful, Kevin. And I know, a lot of districts are purchasing the book and you're doing a lot of work with a whole bunch of educators. I want to know about your training specifically. If someone is listening, they're like, yes, everything we're talking about, it's happening on our campus. We need to make a shift. And, they want to learn more about your training. Like, what are you offering? I know you do kind of a train the trainers type thing too. So I'd love for you to speak on that.
So before I get to the TOT, I would say basically our most popular, I think what's put us on the map more than anything else is our connection driven classroom. Its name has changed over the years, but the tools have not. But at the end of the day, that is a 1 day, full day training, 6-hour training. And typically it can be done with a lead presenter like myself, but I will tell you where the big bang for the buck is. I think we've set for more successes. When we come in to train teachers, we bring other teachers with us. So if you have 50 staff members, I'll bring 5 other teachers that are real teachers from real classrooms, have experienced real struggles and developed real strategies through these tools. So they'll get the information, and it's not a sit and get. Everything about our PD is designed by teachers for teachers. So therefore, when they get done, they're going to have 5 rotations in classrooms where they're getting to experience, unpack the tool. And by the time that they experience, it's experiential. It's not sit and get and they're taking notes. They've experienced the tools. They're taking pictures. They're coming up with like group names and all of this great things. They're creating a community in 6 hours. And by the end, they feel it. They feel stronger and connected, and they feel more confident in the tools. And what I tell them is at the end of the 6 hours, imagine what you feel like in 6 hours with your classmates, your staff members. Imagine what your classes are going to feel like in 6 weeks or 6 months from this. Because when I teach this, it isn't about a one and done. I like what I call micro frequency. So much like in sports, you do fundamentals, or in piano, you do a scale. You got to do those fundamentals. And that's what these tools are. They're done in micro frequency. So it's not about doing a circle in 25 minutes or 30 minutes. It's about doing 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. And that web and that fabric that you create over 2 minutes of connections, it shows that we're more alike than we are different. So when I look at these trainings, that's really what sets us apart. It's done typically in small group. It's experiential. It's all designed by teachers for teachers. And they really appreciate the fact that we created something that was for them. So that is the typical PD in there. The flip of that I started this past summer is that I recognize with school budgets, constraints in professional development time, staff not being able to get away, lack of substitute teachers, like the canvas of education has changed so much over the last 5 years. I recognize, you know what, it's time for me to do a trainer of trainers. So this summer, I launched my first TOT group here in Austin. We had 24 people come. And that what it's doing is now I'm going to teach you to fish like me. I'm going to be a disciple, right? So I'm going to give you my PowerPoint. I'm going to give you the notes. I'm going to give you the manuscript. I'm going to teach you how to do what I do for a living so that you can actually train your own staff. Because to me, it isn't about money. I want to create a crease in connections, as if you folded a piece of paper and you uncreased it, that crease will be there forever. And in order to do that, there's only one of me. I just recognize I can train thousands of people to do this. And I think that trainer of trainer allows me through differentiated discipline, like just meeting them where they're at, their budgets, their times. And how many districts have told me, you trained all of our staff last year and I got 5 new teachers. I don't want to pay $5,000 or $10,000 to train 5 teachers. So I'm like, great, then pay a few $1,000, get your own staff trained, and you can train as many as you want. And I think that trainer of trainer model, even though we started our first cohort, I think that is where ultimately I think I'm going to meet where I'm going to meet a lot of educators at, because that's going to literally hand my toolkit over to them. And now that we have the book, it's a great supplement to be able to add to that that allows that training to come to life, even if I'm not there.
No, it's brilliant. I love that so much. All right, I want to touch on something that's new. You were going on a book tour, but the main piece that I've seen on social media is that you've also connected this to a comedy show. So I need the backstory. I need to know where this came from. You are very engaging and very funny when you do your keynotes. I can attest to that. But I want to know about this whole book tour comedy show piece.
Okay, well, so just quick notes. A year ago, last September of last year, over a year ago, I bought myself an opportunity to do a CEO stand-up challenge in Tampa. So at a true improv club, like I'm talking full blown, but I'm an educator. So my whole set was about who I am. So even though this wasn't an educator audience, I built an entire set and I ended up doing 17 minutes my first time on stage. And I fell in love with it. It was terrifying. I tell people it was like jumping out of a plane, and I would never jump out of a plane, but I did 17 minutes on stage at an improv. It was terrifying, but yet thrilling. So after I left that show, I started realizing like I'm in love with the craft. And what I also resonated was it made me a better speaker. It put more dynamics into the way I spoke because now I could understand. Because what comedy taught me was how do you get to the point shorter instead of longer? And I realized as much as I love to talk, which is very obvious, I realized there's so much ways to get to your point, to the punchline or to the funny part of the story, the climax, in such shorter parts. So it taught me how do I get there in shorter amounts. Now, with that said, then I just realized, you know what? Bored Teachers has 3 million followers, and I'm a follower. I'm a fan of Bored Teachers. Like I love watching their comedy and stage and doing everything else. But here's what I also know is that nobody gives us an opportunity to actually experience that at a smaller level. So for me, my first leap into this was last May in Dallas. I rented out the Irving Uptown Theater in Irving, right in the middle of Dallas Fort Worth area, and I rented it out on May 29th, and I did a free teacher appreciation show, and it was the first time I did 45 minutes of long form stand. So I would tell you, going from 15 minutes to 45 minutes, that's like apples and oranges, but I fell in love with it because it was more of storytelling, which is what my gift is, and then it was kind of a hybrid of storytelling and comedy. So when I did that, I fell in love with the long form, and I said, you know what? I think this is a great way about connections, right? This is a great way for me to connect with the audience. So what I really, when the book came out, the idea was you're going to do a book signing or sweater. And I'm like, yeah, those are great. And being honest, they're kind of boring. So my thought was in San Antonio, I hosted a free comedy show and you get the book. And so I'm like, you know what? Why not lean into both? You get comedy, put belly in your laughter, and put a book in your hand. It's a win-win. It's all about educators. So why not laugh together, cry together, and then share a book together? And so what I did in San Antonio is I did my first one last week. And then what I'm offering to school districts is, hey, like, if you believe the connection-driven classroom could be a very valuable resource, then that's great. I would love to put that book in your hand, but you know what? Why not bring me to your auditorium? Let's put 300 or 400 educators in an auditorium, and let's just have some fun together. And to me, all I would charge them is just, hey, pay $10 for the book. You get the book, you get a comedy show, and I get to connect through comedy and connections with people and other educators to make sure they understand we're all cut from the same cloth. We all have teacher bladders. We all eat fast. Like there's so many things that that people who are not in the education system that we don't realize. We laugh. We go to choir practice, right? We can't even use happy hour in front of the kids. Like there's so many things to laugh about, but that's what I'm really trying to do is I want to make sure that this book doesn't just become a book. I want this book to become about connections, and it is about connections in the classroom. But I think if we take it and elevate it a little bit higher, we can make comedy and connections something that we do from educator to educator. And so that's my call to action it's if you want to have a free comedy show and put some books in people's hands, then let's make this happen, because to me, it's just fun.
All right. So if folks are interested in that specifically, how would they find out about this?
Absolutely. So first what I would just say is it's already been up, but I would go to our website at ddiscipline.com. I think for me, what I'm also learning is when you come to the website, look through it. But I think ultimately what I need to do is set up a call with you, because the more time I have conversations, then we can talk about what your pain points are. What are you interested in doing? So when you go to the website, jump in there. You can go into the info, just send a web, go into it, send an email, just through the website, tell them you're interested in the comedy show. We'll probably make more of a button for a call to action to happen that. But as the website grows, just reach out onto the website or find me on social media and let me know, hey, I'm interested in learning more about the book and seeing what you could do with comedy. Because to me, I would tell people very direct, I love what I do for a living, but I also recognize that if you don't innovate, you evaporate. So,
Yeah.
with that said, I make a call to action. I am a great keynote speaker. You just said it. You've heard me speak. I'm dynamic. I'm funny. So I can fill an audience and I can keynote. Second of all, training that's like my bread and butter. Like that's what I just do in my sleep and the comedy. So now I look at it as a triple threat, right? Like literally, you can bring Kevin Curtis to a conference. I could open up with an amazing keynote, inspirational on the currency of connections, and inspire everybody, fill their heart and their mind, and everybody feel good. I can go to a breakout session and do a breakout session on some of the tools or even some of the differentiated discipline part if you're looking for more behavior. And then we can end the conference with a comedy show, 45 minutes of just standing up and laughing and leaving away with our bellies full, our minds full, and our hearts full. So to me, becoming that triple threat, I don't know if there's many people out there in education that can speak from all three and all three from experiences. And I tell people all the time, they're like, wow, you're an expert. And I tell them I'm not an expert. I don't have a doctorate in this, and I don't want to be Dr. Curtis. I want to be plain old Mr. Curtis. Because when I'm plain old Mr. Curtis, then I don't elevate myself above anyone else. I'm just an educator. I don't have all the solutions, but I do have a lot of experience in jacking life up. And I will tell you, what I've learned through schools is it's not about getting it right, but it is getting it right with the right processes, the right clarity, the right consistency, the tools that are put into place. And I think that's the value that I can bring to school systems.
Yeah. Well, I think you're just showing that there's growth. It's like everything you're
Absolutely.
doing, right? That you're learning,
Yeah.
you're growing. And I think what you're talking about too, personally and professionally, you're growing in a different area. And I think as the landscape has changed, like you said, over the last 5 years, that makes complete sense. I love that you're doing all three. The triple threat is very unique. I'm going to say out of the 315 interviews for Aspire Lead, I don't think anyone has done that. So congrats, Kevin. So with that, let's talk about a question that I've asked all my guests, all
Mhm.
315 in the past. So, for those aspiring and current leaders, if there's something you do tomorrow or next week, what would you recommend them do?
Lead with clarity.
Mhm.
One thing that I learned as an entrepreneur, but also I wish I would have known this when I was in that space, sitting in that office and behind that
Sure.
desk, is it whatever you're leading, whatever you're preaching, whatever you're teaching from classroom teachers to leaders, it has to be so clear that it cannot be misunderstood. Now, I think people gloss over that. And what I would say, Joshua, is if you pause on that long enough, I promise you that there are things that you are leading in your school right now that are not clear. They're not so crystal clear that they cannot be misunderstood. And to me, when I work, and I work with coaching, consulting, I work with campus leaders and district leaders as well. And to me, that's where I always start, because if we don't have clarity first, then the rest of it is just going to get in the way. It's just going to be muddy, right? So when I say this is, and one quick example, I want to make this short, but one quick example is there was a school in Killeen that had this gingerbread figure, and it said, "This is what a successful student looks like." And I said, "Great." So I threw this curveball at it. I said, "So what does an unsuccessful student look like?" And they were like, um, yeah. And I was like, yeah, you haven't even addressed it." And they were like, they were all taking notes, right? They were like, well, what do you, and what I told them is how many, here's the deal. Campus leaders, the one thing beyond clarity is also think about this clarity with assumptions. How many kids in the hallway right now, we're so good at telling them what to do or what not to do. Sorry, let me phrase it. We're so good at telling them what not to do, we never tell them what to do. And to me, there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of lack of clarity. So if I was going to work with a school leader, the first thing I would do is sit down and look for assumptions and lack of clarity, because if we can turn both of those, or turn one of them up and turn one of them down, we can start to clear a path that will allow us to implement the things that we know we want to. But my opinion, sometimes that clarity and assumptions are blocking those from happening.
Great points. All right. So, Kevin, I know we've talked about your website, but if someone is looking to follow you on social media, is there a certain platform that you would recommend for them to start following you on?
I mean, I'm on, we're on Twitter at differentiated discipline on all the other platforms. I mean, whether
Mhm.
it's social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, I mean, ultimately, I don't have one more than the other. I will tell you though, if you're wanting to know more about what I do, preach, and teach, and you haven't followed me on social media, the one thing I will say is, and I think I gave you this link, is to my YouTube.
Yes.
Because the one thing I am very proud of is I've invested in a company that has helped me amplify my voice. And shout out to Four Productions, because they're a company where I fly to Miami, I videotape within a few days all of my content, and then they're able to push it out for me. But that clear, consistent content is probably the best version of the content I've put out. And so somebody gave me an example the other day, said you should create a playlist for like PLCs and other things, because I have hundreds of videos, and some are from 1 to 3 minutes to 5 minutes. They're not long, but if you're really wanting to learn more about what I preach and teach, I would recommend going to the YouTube, click on some of the videos, learn to see, because to me, I'm going to be talking about whether it's proactive or responsive. I'm going to be talking about everything that my mind and experiences have brought to the surface. And that is probably where you can probably gain more knowledge, is through our YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, for those who are watching on YouTube, first off, thank you. Second of all, the link is there for you, and it'll be in the show notes, so you can click on it. It'll be extremely accessible to you. So we'll make sure that we have that both on my website, joshsaber.com, but then also on your podcast platforms and on YouTube. That way you can access everything that Kevin is producing. Also, the content that he's pushing out on social media is wonderful. So make sure that you're giving him a follow. Reach out to him on his website, learn about all the different things, and then most definitely grab this wonderful book, which is The Connection Driven Classroom. I'm going to have the link also in the show notes for those who are interested. I know the pain point, the number one pain point that I've heard from administrators and educators, specifically this year more than ever, is about student discipline, student choices, and what to do differently. And I know that, Kevin, you have, so many strategies that folks can learn right away and implement. It's easy, it's quick. It's something that has been a huge piece in my life, both as an educator and an administrator. And man, I just appreciate all that you're doing.
Oh man, thanks, Josh, man. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share this message and this voice and this platform. Again, I just care so, if you read a book, you'll understand why I am so passionate. All my brothers are dead because of drugs and alcohol. I should have been a statistic. I was introduced to drugs at an early age. And what really saved me was teachers. And I will tell you, I'll just share you from a heartfelt moment. I did my teacher comedy book thing the other night, but here was probably the biggest moment of my entire life, particularly as an educator, was my elementary teacher, who invested in me and taught me, what planted the seed, and I wanted to be a teacher. She came to that show, Josh.
Wow.
I have not seen her since elementary school. And she came to the show, and I wept. And I've made calls on my podcast directly out to her, but to actually see her in person and for me to share my passion. And I will tell you, I don't want to get emotional, but the next day after my comedy show, she called me and she said, and it felt like I was back in fourth grade. She said, "I'm so proud of you. You did so good last night." And to hear that from your elementary teacher at 55 years old, it's still transformative. I mean, it didn't matter if anyone else in the world liked what I said or did anything. That woman validated what I do and who I am. And I give a lot of credit to her and many other educators, because the DNA of who educators are is inside of me. And all I want to do is pour it out into other people.
Well, it shows, and it just also shows you the power of the teacher and how you can transform a life. And, kudos to her for, believing in you, and then also, sharing some wisdom with you at a young age to instill that, to become a teacher. That's wonderful. And like I said, man, you're doing such good work. And man, I'm just honored to have you on the podcast, and I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Jess. Appreciate it.